Joining us right now, the Next Revolution host, Steve Hilton. There's no politics in this.
I mean, it's just laughable. By the way, he's talking about a completely different case. So what that's got to do with anything, I don't know. I watched that interview yesterday. It was a complete mess. I mean, he basically had nothing to say. And the central point is actually that he didn't want to prosecute this. So the point about politicization is so obvious to any normal, reasonable person. And the fact that you still have people, I saw the New York Times editorial board, for example, last week saying there's no evidence that this is politically motivated. You have all the people on cable news, on Morning Show, all the rest of them saying, how could anyone possibly say it was politically motivated? Well, I'll tell you who says it's politically motivated. The Mr. Ultra MAGA himself on CNN, Fareed Zakaria, who you couldn't find someone who's more of a kind of globalist establishment figure than him. He went through all the reasons why it's clearly politically motivated. Number one, that Alvin Bragg ran for office in his campaign, a political campaign. He ran for office on the pledge to do this. He looked at the evidence. He rejected it. Alvin Bragg didn't pursue the case, then got massive pushback from his political base, the Democrat activists in New York. Then he had two people leave and complain about the fact that he didn't bring the case. Then finally he finds some other reason to bring it. Of course it's political. Anyone who denies it's political is just making a fool of themselves.
So, Steve, look at your crystal ball. What does America look like after the political prosecution of a president? It doesn't just, stay in our history. Looking forward, you're going to see political prosecutions. Republicans are going to do it to Democrats, and Democrats are going to keep doing it to Republicans. Yes. America becomes completely political, and we're prosecuting political enemies.
Exactly. Look, I mean, again, there's a former federal prosecutor made exactly this case in the pages of the New York Times yesterday, that you'll have prosecutors all over the country trying to do this. And of course, we should repeat, just to, for the avoidance of doubt, of course it's true that no one is above the law, and that if there are crimes there, they should be investigated and prosecuted. But the opposite is happening here. It's you're taking the person and trying to find a crime. That process will now be going on. As I pointed out last night on my show, if we're talking about, as we are in this case, just disregarding the statute of limitations, and if we're saying that paying hush money in a campaign is an incredibly severe crime, then there's presumably some prosecutor somewhere in Little Rock, Arkansas, who's saying, hang on a second, why don't we take a look at Bill and Hillary Clinton, who paid far more money to far more women for far more serious allegations than anything Trump has been accused of. And you can see it going on and on. There's no end of potential crimes that I'm sure some enterprising, creative prosecutor somewhere in the country will be able to try and pin on Joe Biden when he leaves office, and everyone else. It's a terrible precedent.
Steve, I do know that Biden is getting a pass right now, because none of us are sitting around talking about the hardship that is raining down on hardworking Americans, a hardship solely created by Biden and company.
Exactly. I mean, you look at their agenda, it's completely, the consequences of it are just incredibly painful for everyone domestically, exactly as you said, in terms of the sort of basic economic facts. I mean, you have Democrats, they keep saying, after the State of the Union was the last example where he was touting all these things that he'd done, all this legislation that he'd passed, and yet the public, through the opinion polls, are overwhelming majorities saying that they're worse off, they think the country's going in the wrong direction, and so on, and they can't understand why. Why? Because the facts of life for real people are terrible in terms of their earning power, the basic equation. Their earnings are going up much more slowly than prices are going up. And both ends of that equation have been made worse by Biden's economic policies. And then you don't even, that's before we even mention the complete collapse of America's prestige and standing around the world as you look at the foreign policy fiasco that he's doing, where you see China and Brazil now ditching the dollar. You see Saudi Arabia teaming up with China to do peace deals with Iran in the Middle East and joining the Chinese trading bloc. I mean, it's a complete disaster on the foreign policy front.
No success anywhere. Steve Hilton, always smart. Next Revolution, thanks for joining us.